Welcome to Between the Sharks. Today I want to talk about my 1954 Chevrolet. This is my first car, the first car I ever bought myself, my first project, and honestly it's the first car I ever worked on. Up to the point that I bought this car, I don't think I had ever even changed oil. So when I got the car, it looked like this, and it has come a long way and I learned a ton working on it, but I want to talk about why it's taken 20 years and counting to reliably be on the road, and some of the pitfalls, some of my mistakes, quick journey for anybody out there that's got a stalled project or is thinking about getting a new project. Just want to tell you what happened here. This car I bought when I was 19. It was in a field in Iowa. It was delivered to me off of an old car trader ad, the old paper magazine. The engine was locked up, whatever. I was gonna do a motor swap anyway, at least that's what I had in my head. I had never worked on a car before. I didn't know what I was doing. However, back in those days, there wasn't YouTube, which is so great, but you could buy restoration books that would teach you how to restore your car, or you could read magazines. And the ones on the shelf at the time were like Street Rodder and Custom Rodder were what I could find. And so I would go to Barnes & Noble, buy a cup of coffee, read the magazine cover to cover, and then put it back on the shelf and split. So what I didn't understand back then was that they were mostly trying to sell me the products in there. It wasn't like the only way you could do a car, but they were trying to sell you the Mustang 2 front suspension with the 350 mounts and all this other stuff. So in my brain pan, you had to have a rebuilt motor and a rebuilt transmission to get anywhere and do anything. I ended up on the hunt for a 283, and I just still thought it had to be rebuilt because I didn't know anything about engines, and I wanted one that worked. So I found a guy with a running one, and his car had gotten crushed by a tree, and I wish I had bought that motor because it would have been great. But he told me that there was a machine shop that had done a block, and the customer had flaked out. So he gave me their number. I called them. They said they would give me the block for free for the machine work, the parts at cost, and whatever. And I said, okay, well, can you put it together for me all the way to a short block with the heads on and everything else? Because I don't know how to do any of that stuff. Didn't know how to set valves. I didn't know any of it. So here I am with this rebuilt motor. All right, never run a V8, never run a carbureted engine before, don't know anything about it. So I've got to have period correct speed parts, even though it's a closed hood car. So one of the most fun things about building a hot rod is chasing down speed parts if you're into that kind of thing. So I tracked down this. 3 Stromberg carburetors, Edelbrock intake, rebuilt the carburetors the best I could do, which I had never rebuilt carburetors before. And these things are from the 40s, they're 97s, and my ability stopped basically at cleaning and gaskets. Like, that's what I could do. So the throttle shaft bushings are pretty worn out, so they were kind of leaky. But I put it on anyway, and the engine would run, but I never got it to run great. You know, never got it to start reliably, never got it to, never got it to do anything reliably, really. And I always assumed that it was this. So I fought it, and I fought it, and I fought it, and I never got anywhere. And I went on and I built other cars and worked on other projects and bought more stuff. And fast forward a couple years, the Chevy mostly sat, it didn't like to start, never liked to start when it's hot. I don't know if I still have that problem really. I just got so fed up with it that I decided to finally check the compression, which I'd learned to do somewhere in that span. I didn't know when I got the motor, it was rebuilt anyway. Like, what could be wrong with it? It had to be something that I did, right? So I checked the compression, and I've got dead cylinders on both sides, 2 dead cylinders on both sides. So I decided, that's it. This engine's cursed. I just can't stand it. It maybe had, I don't know, I'm somewhere between 1,500 and 3,000 miles total since the rebuild. So I bought that. It's a running, I think it's 350 or whatever, off Craigslist, and I was just gonna do an engine swap. And so I decided, well, if I'm gonna do an engine swap, I may as well pull the heads and see what's going on, because I was ticked off kind of deal. So I pulled the heads, took the heads to the machine shop, and they tested it, and the valve seats were toast. So the heads were never rebuilt, and they were put on poorly, and that was most likely the majority of my problem running the 3-deuce setup that's still sitting up there. So, fast forward. I get the heads back, put the engine back together, and I want the simplest, most straightforward setup that you could possibly get. So I went for a bone stock 283 2-barrel intake. That's all the carburation this engine really should need anyway, and I just wanted to get to 0. So I bought that thing, I bought the carburetor for it, I rebuilt the carburetor, and I put it on the car, and I ran it, and I got it warmed up, and maybe put a couple of laps around the block on it, parked it, and then it sat again. So after it sat yet again, was working on the Model T or on the Cadillac over there, and I'm just working in circles around this car constantly. I was like, I never drive it. I'll never let it go. I don't ever want to let it go. I love this car. I learned so much on this car, but I've never finished it, I guess. And so I decided, all right, I got to take it out for a spin. It hasn't had new gas put into it in years. Let's see. Fire it up. I can get it to run, but the carburetor that I had rebuilt had unrebuilt itself by sitting with ethanol fuel for years. My own fault. No stabilizer, no nothing. It was just a mess. The throttle shaft was leaking, like sucking wind bad, so it had a vacuum leak. The car still ran, but again, it just got to the point that I was frustrated with it, and rebuilding that 2-barrel was going to be such an endeavor with the throttle shaft bushings and everything else that I just decided it's time to just, again, in theory, simplify it with a not worn out carburetor. So I've got an Edelbrock, and to put that on, I just bought a basic Edelbrock intake. It's not as cool as the stuff that I had on there, but really I'm not worried. What good is cool if it can't get me down the road? You know what I mean? I'm much better at this stuff than I used to be when I put this car together. So maybe I'll give another crack at the 3-deuce setup on something else. I've run them on other cars much more successfully, believe it or not. This one's just been my unicorn, and I've been chasing it down. So now we've got an Edelbrock carburetor on it that's been on it for like 2 months. Edelbrock intake and points, generator, water pump, headers to clear the steering. That's what we got going on here. It's attached to a 4-speed, attached to a 57 Chevy rear end. This thing is so simple, it should, like, it's got to want to work. So once I got this thing on here, I fired it up once. Again, the wiring under the dash just basically started smoking. Car wouldn't start. Had to push it back in, at which point I decided I had to rewire it. I knew that that was something that had to happen. The wiring was all original. I didn't want to burn the car to the ground. So, now that I've wired it, put the interior back together, there's nothing to do but see how she runs. She probably needs a full tune-up, points. Even though they got no miles or anything on them, maybe I'll clean them up. I don't know. We got to see. We got to pretend, make myself believe that either this is a brand new engine, which it should be very close to, or it's an engine that's been sitting for 20 years, which it also is. So we're going to have to go through all of the steps for all of those things. Check all the plug wires, check the points, check the fluids, and hopefully she'll run. So that about gets you up to speed as to where it is now. But it basically, I just wanted to illustrate the journey of not having the skill set and knowledge to check the motor and the assumption that it was rebuilt and therefore good. sort of bit me in the butt, but I kept on doing stuff with cars and building cars and working on things, and even after I learned how to do the things, I had sort of backburnered this because I was so burnt out and so frustrated because I'd used every extent of my knowledge and was never able to make it better. Then I went through the phase where I got the heads rebuilt and put it back together, took it around the block, stalled a little bit, and I just said, well, that's good enough. It's better. It's not smoking like it was. Rechecked the compression, had compression. And then I let it sit again. Just again, like either afraid of the defeat of breaking it while driving it or proving that that was not the solution that it needed to be. And so here we are now. Like, what's changed? I don't know. Just looking at it, it's a cool car. It's in here every day. And for whatever reason, the motivation came back and I decided to get after it. Been back on it for like 6 weeks. I mean, maybe this is happening to you guys out there. I'm happy that I'm back on it, but I also wanted to give something for guys like me out there to relate to of, you know, seriously stalled projects. If you can find the motivation, you can pick them back up. Hopefully your skill sets are growing. And, you know, one way or the other, you'll be willing to dive in and face the thing that you were afraid of. You know, I was afraid that the motor was going to be bad. I didn't want to believe it. Fixed it. Time to finish fixing it. So we're going to have this thing back on the road. I'm excited about it. I'm going to bring you guys along for the ride if you're interested. And good luck out there with your projects. We'll see you soon when we get this thing fired back up.